Hello coders, good afternoon, good evening. It is episode 107 of the How to Code Well podcast. And today we're going to be talking about tips for junior web developers. I have 26 of these tips to go through. This is live, and what usually happens when I do a live podcast is that I kind of add more to it, so I don't think we're going to just have 26. We'll probably have a lot more as we go through. Before I get into this, though, as I mentioned, this is live, so if anybody's got any comments, questions, suggestions, anything they want to add to this, then please do feel free to put your comments down in the chat as we go, and I'll get to them. If not, of course, you can check out our Discord server. Go to howtocodewell.net/Discord to join and further the conversation there as well. Now, before we dive straight in, I said last week that there were some possible plans for the future of this podcast, one of which is to potentially have some form of book club going on, and the other one is to have more guests on. Now, the first one I kind of need to touch on a little bit, and that is the fact that I can't really do what I had planned to do due to copyright law. I can't actually, because what I had planned was to read a book and show the pages of the book on the video, and we would basically read together. I can't do that because of copyright law. Basically, in my innocence and my naivety, I just didn't appreciate that, of course. So unfortunately, we can't do that. However, I do want to do something around the book club, a book club somehow, but I just need to think about it a little bit more, and I'll let you know how that goes. Okay, so let's get straight into this then. Let's get into this. So this talk is about 26 tips for junior developers, and I've focused this down to junior developers because, in my opinion, a lot of senior developers would already have this down. So this would certainly help those coming into the industry or have just started their first role in the industry. These will perhaps talk about some career advice as well, plus some soft skills, not that I like the term soft skills, those kind of skills, as well as the technical skills too. And I haven't picked on any particular programming language or front or discipline as your front end or back end. This is very generic for all types of web developers. Okay, so before we do, I have my traditional beer. This is a Jamestown, and very nice and cold. So cheers, everybody. Welcome to episode 107. It is the 24th of June, 2021. And that is a lovely, lovely beer. Okay, so number one. Okay, imagine you've just started your new job. So your first ever job in web development. One of the first things you will do one of the first technical things that you will do is that you will set up your machine. You will you will create your local environment. Now, whether you're in a team that is working on a single project or whether you're working on a team that has lots of little projects. So, for instance, you could be working for a web design or a web agency. So working on multiple projects, or whether you're working on a big project and you are part of a team that works on a specific part of that one project. Regardless of which one, you will be setting up your machine. And the people before you who have been working there for a long time, they would have already set up their machines. And they would have hopefully have created a guide for new developers who come on to follow and create, it was basically a how-to cheat sheet guide where you can go through it step by step, setting up your machine, whether they use, Docker, whether they use a LAMP stack or a WAMP stack, or however they do it, they will document that. Also, how to pull down the assets, the database, that kind of jazz. Now, I must admit, there hasn't really been a project that I've got into where the documentation has been on point. There's always been some hurdle whether I've read the documentation wrong or whether the documentation is just lacking, and maybe I don't know, it was written for an operating system that's too old. So basically what I'm saying is that I've rarely worked on a project where I can just read the documentation and get everything running straight away. There's always some back and forth between me and another developer to try and get my development environment up to speed. And what would happen perhaps is that the previous devs, they would have hit these issues, and they would have probably have been on a very tight time constraint, and or maybe this would have been an unwritten sort of guide, if you will. Take this as an opportunity to improve the documentation. That's the tip here. Improve the documentation. So if you're reading something and it says do this and this will happen, if that doesn't happen, then improve the documentation. And if you can't improve the documentation, request to, hopefully, I mean, normally this documentation is a collaborative thing, right? So by improving the documentation, you're showing that you are willing and able to help the team as a whole go forward. The other developers who come after you will be, would appreciate this as well. And if there's any documentation that you see that is old and deprecated that doesn't make any sense anymore, update that documentation and say that it's old and deprecated, and please follow this new doc. So do that. That also teaches you how to use their tooling, right? Their tooling, that's an important thing. Okay, number 2. Now, let's just say this isn't really in any order. Okay, this really isn't in any order. I basically threw this together. It's not in any form of order. It's just stuff that I've picked up over the years. So number 2 is to request meetings. Okay, now that sounds a little bit sort of like, oh my gosh, this is my first ever web dev job. I shouldn't be the one requesting meetings. I should be the one going to meetings that have been requested by me, right? Of me. But what you want to do is, there's going to be a lot of things that you will struggle on as a new dev. And what you want to do is carve out some time between you and someone else to go over those bits, those areas. And also so this is now tip 3, talk to testers. And tip 4 is to talk to the product owners. So you can kind of wrap this up into one little tip, I suppose. So you want to, I'll go back. So you want to request meetings whenever you feel like you're stuck. And when I say request meetings sounds very formal. It doesn't have to be a formal thing. It could just be a chat. As in, we usually do a lot of things remote now, right? Thank you, COVID. So it could be can I have a chat, through a team chat, or through a Zoom chat, or a Slack chat. Can I have a video call, or do you fancy a chat? That kind of thing. To those testers, to the product owners, to the people who know more about the thing that you're working on. So when I say talk to testers, you want to understand how the testers or the QA engineers are going to actually test your work. So they might know some interesting hints that you should know and you would normally pick up as you go. If you can get those quickly, that's great. What automation do they use? What automated tools do they use? How do they go about testing? Do they use Gherkin? Do they use other ways to test your work? Are they just looking at things visually? Get an idea for how, what user accounts do they play with? Sort of get an insight to their world, because this shows that you have an appreciation for what they do as well. I mean, you think of it like this: a team of people all working for a common goal. Each one of those team members kind of needs to understand what the other team member is doing. And also, this will help you in the future when you're stuck on something. You'll go, oh, yeah, no, I had a conversation with such and such from QA, and in passing, they mentioned this. And so they might know a little bit more about that. So, This is all about building relationships amongst you and your team. You are the new person, new blood on the team, and it's good to start building as many bridges as possible. So also talk to the product owners. Now, the difference between QA and product owners, and we could put in all sorts of different actors into this mix, but I picked on product owners and testers because on paper, they have very different agendas. The testers are testing something, and the product owners own something, right? So you want to discover the different agendas, the different perspectives. You want to be empathetic on the needs of the product owners versus the needs of the QA engineers. And please do replace QA engineers with anything else, or product owners with anything else. Any other team that is influencing what you do. I have experience with working with charities, for instance, and listening to product owners in the charities space is fascinating because they always have very unique desires and needs. It's compared to product owners of, say, an e-commerce company, right? Okay, so you want to get an insight to this, and this increases your knowledge of web development as a whole, which is great. Okay, so number 5, I think we're at now, is get it reviewed. So, what normally happens is you're given a task, and maybe it's a bug, or maybe it's a new feature, and you're building that out, you're developing that out, or you're fixing that if it's a bug. And then it will come to a point where it needs to get tested, and then it needs to get deployed. Now, that's the usual typical sort of overview of how that all works. But what you can do in the meantime, in sort of like in the development space, is actually get it reviewed, even if it's from someone who isn't actually working on the project. So you could just say, hey, I just wrote this code. I don't suppose you could just check it over for me, or hey, I've just designed this new landing page. I don't suppose you can just check it over for me, could you? Things you may find are spelling mistakes, typos. You may find some margin misalignments, some alignments in various places. They may look at it on a different browser than you are, or a different screen size that you've got. They might look at your code with the knowledge of other code that they're aware of, and they may give you hints on how to do things better. So you want to get it reviewed before you get it tested, before you get it out to deployment. And it's kind of that rinse and repeat cycle. So you do a change. We are leaning very closely to pull requests, where you do a pull request and someone reviews your code. But it might be that actually you just want to quickly do a screen share with someone and just say, look, I've just done this. Can we just rubber duck this together? Or can we just look at this screen and just pick at it a little bit? So don't be afraid of criticism either as a junior dev. You want to be seeing sort of constructive criticism. You want to be seeing any kind of criticism as a way of improving, right? You are a junior developer in a team of a lot of senior developers, perhaps, and so you have a lot to learn. Okay, so we're going to skip number 7. We're going to go straight to number 8, and that is to learn the process. Now, this is learning the process of the company. So I've mentioned there that we have perhaps development, then we have QA, then we have deployment. Now, I've worked in teams where there's various different steps in between those things. It's not just suddenly dev to deploy or dev to QA to deploy. There are other steps in between. There are things perhaps that you need to write, and there's maybe some admin things that you need to do. There may be some other people that you haven't even seen yet that you need to inform that this is going to happen. So you need to learn how the cogs in this machine work. And this machine is going to be a very different machine to the machine that you perhaps work in later on in your career, right? So every job that I've had has a very different process. They may follow the same sort of agile principles, the same sort of methodologies, but they have a very different way of doing things, in the sense of maybe they use a different tool to do the auditing. Maybe they have someone who is, wears many hats, and therefore, their roles are perhaps a little bit more diluted than other teams, maybe. So you want to learn how the team operates, and you want to try and work with it rather than against it. If you've got any suggestions of how to improve the process, then by all means let people know, but don't let them know in a sort of a negative way. You want to be seen as wanting to improve the process if you've got an improvement. Okay, so we're going to go back to number 7, and that is to don't follow cookie cutter tutorials, make your own stuff. Okay, I'm going to take a beer for this because this might be a little bit big. Don't follow cookie cutter tutorials and make your own stuff. So we're now moving more into the learning of web development. This is an interesting one because this kind of leans a little bit on tutorial hell, and yeah. So I haven't really been able to formulate this yet, but I haven't experienced tutorial hell. In fact, I had to get it explained to me what tutorial hell was, and I will be doing a video on why I don't think I've ever been in it, but I still need to formulate that right. But what I would like to just say at this point is that learning tutorials and doing courses where you are literally copying and pasting or just writing exactly the same code as the person who is teaching, well, you'll just end up with their project. You won't end up with your project. So, and by doing that, that's what I mean by cookie cutter tutorials, because it's just a cookie cutter, right? You are creating the same thing as everyone else has done who's watched that tutorial or watched that project. What you want to do, in my opinion, is to make your own stuff, right? So, if you have an idea and you don't know how to create that idea, build that idea, develop that idea, as in, code that idea, then think of the components that idea requires and then learn tutorials around that one component. Don't learn everything under the sun. There is too much of web development to learn. You'll never, ever learn every single thing about web development because it is constantly changing. But if you have an actual plan, an actual goal, a tangible thing that you want to build, and you can break that up into smaller little things, right? Let's say you wanted to build a portfolio site, and we'll get on to portfolios later. Let's say you wanted to build a portfolio site, and on the portfolio site, you wanted to build, a carousel of your work. So learn a project, go and find a tutorial that will teach you how to build carousels. But don't continue on that tutorial until you've done exactly just enough until you've actually come away with the carousel. Maybe that project that you're looking at that is a carousel plus something else. Well, forget about the something else because you don't care about that at this point in time. You don't care about that. Your end goal is to build something for you, whether it's a portfolio or whether it's something that's going to help you out as a dev. So don't get trapped. Don't get into the tutorial trap. Now, as you can probably tell, I still need to formulate my ideas a little bit better around tutorial hell. I certainly don't want to come across patronizing or anything, but I don't feel like I have ever been in tutorial hell. I think I've been taught to learn in a specific way through college and university, and again, that's getting into topics that we probably shouldn't be getting into in this episode. But I have some views, shall we say. I need to formulate those views before we get into that. But what I just want to say here is to don't follow cookie cutter tutorials all the time, and also, try and make your own things. Don't just make everybody else's thing. Make your own thing. And if you come across an issue that you need to resolve, then find a tutorial that will fit that issue or that feature. But if that tutorial waffles on to anything else, that's the time to stop it, because you need to work on your thing. Otherwise, you'll never learn how to build anything. You'll just be building everything else that everyone else has done. Let's say, for instance, going back to the carousel thing here. So let's say, for instance, you wanted to build a carousel of your projects, right? And you're looking at a tutorial that is showing you a carousel of images, of images. You're going to be calling your variables different. You're going to be calling your classes different. You're going to be calling all sorts of things different, tailored to the thing that you're building. You're not going to be following to the letter the tutorial because you have your own plan. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's by diverging away from the cookie cutter tutorial, you then start following your own path, and you start coming up with your own bugs, and you start fixing your own bugs. That is a skill. That is a skill that everybody needs to have. And also, when you're following cookie cutter tutorials, it's very tempting to just copy and paste. And I highly don't recommend copying and pasting code. When you're new, you want to be typing everything out. You want to be feeling the keys on your fingers. You want to know where the keys are. You want to write this stuff out. I mean, that's going to take ages, but this is a long process. Copying and pasting code is it's not good. It's not good because you're not testing yourself. And again, we're moving back into the realms of tutorial hell bit here. But when you're writing code yourself, you then have the opportunity. I mean, when I wrote code myself, when I was looking at tutorials, I would do a lot of things wrong. But then I used the tutorial as a template, and I was able to compare the two, right? I was able to do basically a diff between the two. And by just stopping and comparing and finding out that, yes, actually, excuse me, one of my operators is wrong, or maybe the equal sign is too close to the variable name, or whatever is wrong. Maybe I've missed a colon here. You won't find that when you copy and paste tutorials. You won't find that when you're copying and pasting code. You'll only get to that when you're actually comparing your code to something else. And that's why I don't recommend copying and pasting when you're starting out, because you need to create your own path, as I mentioned, and navigate your own bugs. And you'll discover things in there that you probably didn't appreciate. If you're copying and pasting a bunch of code that has semicolons on the end, or, formatted in a certain way, you won't have a level of appreciation for that, right? Okay, let's get off of that subject now, because I can see myself falling into that sort of the fiery pit of tutorial hell. Okay, so where are we now? We are on number 9. Yes, number 9 is to learn the cost-benefit analysis. What on earth does that mean? Well, this is learning the time spent, the time that you can spend doing dev versus the benefits to the end user, right? And also learning things that is learning how to do things that is going to make you more efficient as a developer as well. Learning automation, learning how, if you're doing the same thing again and again and again, well, actually, the cost benefit analysis there is, well, if you were to write a script that does that, Maybe it's putting commands in a makefile. Maybe it's setting up your IDE, so you just have to do a shortcut key and then suddenly you've got a template. That kind of stuff. So you want to basically learn how. I'm not going to use the word cutting corners. You basically want to learn how to make yourself more efficient. Because if you're, as a junior dev, more efficient, then your team is going to be more efficient, which means that you are going to be, and your team, better off for it, and you'll go up the ranks. So if for instance someone was to say, hey, can you search for this on your IDE, and the shortcut key, but another developer doesn't know the shortcut key, and you get there first. You know what I mean? It's so knowing those things, knowing the benefits of those things is really, really important. And also just sort of talking about the end user perspective. This is your end user. So having a level of appreciation of the people who are actually using your tools that you're creating and developing, knowing that your feature that you're creating is actually going to make someone's life a little easier or better, or help the company go in a direction. And you can kind of, when you get quite far in your career, you can kind of identify areas of code that you would like to update as a developer because it's a pain in the ass, but you can kind of identify why there isn't a requirement to update that, because it's not going to have any benefit or a very negligible benefit to the end user. So you end up with an appreciation for why certain things have happened in the code, or why certain things haven't happened in the code. And from a previous point about talking to the product owners and the QA engineers or the business owners or whoever, the other departments, you get a sense for how the company has progressed to the point you're at the moment, and the emphasis on certain areas of the code that they would prefer you to work on instead of other areas of the code. Now, if you're working on code that is very troublesome to work on, and you can actually say, look, if we spent some time refactoring this chaotic piece of code, then we would actually save time in the long run, because we would be able to, test it better. We might be able to deploy it faster. It would become less risky. Those kind of factors. Then come up with and this is a point somewhere in this list, to come up with a proposal for those kind of things. Okay, I think I'm stepping on the toes of the other tips, so we'll swiftly move on. Okay, so number 10 is to be active on social media. Okay, so be active on social media, and it's not just hello, look at me kind of stuff. It's posting links to your portfolio. Again, we'll talk about portfolios. I said this isn't in any order. So any kind of tutorials that you've seen, any podcasts that you've watched, anything that you've learned, shout it out in social media. If you're a Facebook user, put it on a Facebook post. If you're on Twitter, tweet it. If you're a video person like me, then mention it in a video. You want to be showing that you're part of the wider community. But also, one thing to be aware of is that it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are toxic areas of Twitter, Facebook, all sorts of places. There are silly debates that, is HTML a programming language? Is JavaScript better than blah, blah, blah? Try and keep away from them. Focus more about the educational side of things, so things that you've learned, things that other people have learned. Try and use social media as a means of sharing tips rather than sharing toxicity. And a tip that I'm trying desperately to adhere to is to try as hard as you can, and this is very difficult when you are a content creator, to keep away from toxicity and not get involved in toxicity, you want to you basically just shut your phone off. Yes. Some things wind me up. Anyway, let's move on to number 11, and that is to go to meetups. So meetups outside of work, to see other developers in your town or your city, or even other cities. Travel to other meetups. It's a little bit nerve-wracking to begin with, right? It's look, you're a junior dev and you're going into a room full of people who are probably a lot. If let's say, for instance, this is your first 3 months as a web developer, then you're probably one of the few who've just started, because a lot of those, especially the speakers, would probably be there, have been there for quite some time. So it is very nerve-wracking, but still go to meetups and be involved in conversations. And also try and go to the, I can't say for all meetups, but the meetups that I've been to, there's usually a pub or a bar that you go to afterwards. Go to those, and rub shoulders against those who are better than you, essentially. Because listen to what they get up to in their careers. Listen to what they've done, what tools that they've worked on. Ask questions, and do not be afraid of asking silly questions. You can, if it makes you feel comfortable, and I've done this. Say that this is perhaps your first time here, or I've only been in development for X amount of months or years, and then ask the question, because then that's showing the other person where you're coming from, that kind of jazz. But it's also very fun. There's also a fun element to it, which is good. It's a bit tricky these days with COVID and everything, because a lot of stuff is remote. So, but that does open the doors. You can go to meetups all over the world now, can't you? Because you can do Zooms all over the place. And whether you've got your camera on or not, or whether you're on mute or not, you can just listen to it like a podcast, which is live. We'll get on to podcasts in a minute. Okay, so number 12, this is more of a technical thing. So number 12, just get a swig of the beer. 12, learn the differences between clean and messy code. Ooh. Okay, so this is a concept that I never had when I started, right? I didn't know what a clean piece of code was versus what a messy piece of code was. I didn't understand, because, hey, I didn't understand what a the various control flows were, because I was just learning, because I was just starting out. But learning clean, lean, mean code is vital, because you get you learn how to do things differently. You learn how to make things more readable. The team members around you will be more appreciative of this. If you can be part of pull requests, and even if you're not commenting on pull requests, read the comments of previous pull requests, and find how your team operates. But in terms of clean and messy code, you want to identify the areas that make code messy, as well as how to address those. Now, this is all well and good when you're a senior dev, but when you're a junior dev, this can get quite troublesome, because when you know how to clean up code, it's very tempting to just do it, right? But because you're perhaps very new to the team, you probably haven't maybe thought of all the various different entry points into that. And so cleaning that code up may provide elements of regression that you will need to test. And if you clean the code up and it's code that isn't in the scope of what you're doing. Like, for instance, I mean, a large chunk of something that I do a large chunk of what I do, I'm a contractor, is that I would go into legacy code, and I would I audit and identify areas of code to clean up. But I don't clean the code up until I've notified someone my intentions, because there is and we go back to the QA engineers, and we go back to the other stakeholders in this. If you make a change, you may require other people to do work, and yes, the change may be for good, but in certain places, in certain scenarios, that change needs to be scoped, because it's a change request. So don't just dive in. That's what I'm trying to say. So this is going back to the communication part. If you found some code that's messy and you want to clean it up, let someone know. Let someone know what you're going to do. And this goes on to the next tip of peer programming. So, jump on a call, as I mentioned before, say request meeting. So, I've just found this bunch of messy code, and I would like to propose that we change it to this. What do you think? You could even go one step further and look at the annotations of Git and find out who wrote that code. Don't do it in a blamey kind of way. Just, they wrote that code, so they would hopefully have some knowledge about that code, depending on how long they wrote it, of course. And then see if you can get them involved. Don't blame them for it. Don't point a finger at them, because you at this point in time don't have an appreciation for where they were when they were writing that code. They could have had all sorts of constraints that they had to deal with, and that was the easiest thing that they could come up with at that particular point of time, based on the constraints that they had. So it should never be a finger pointing exercise. It should be an exercise of improving the code going forward. But you want to be a part of the code reviews. You want to be part of the conversation, and you want to be striving for making cleaner code. But you should be doing so when you're allowed to. It sounds really weird. As a developer, you should be allowed to make your code cleaner, sure. But in certain circumstances, without any knowledge of what regression you might be putting in, it's always best to check, I find. It's always best to check. Okay, so the next one is to learn the code styles of the team. So do they use tabs? Do they use spaces? Do they prefer any sort of variable naming convention? I've worked with teams that prefer things uppercase, their first character uppercase. I've worked with teams where if it's an object, they have an O. Okay, so an O and then the capital object name. So if it was... say if it was a user object, then it would be O user, for instance, for an object user, and A user for an array of a user, So you want to learn the code styles. Now, you want to adapt to the code styles that you're working within. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that. Some code styles are quite interesting, shall we say. Some places don't have a code style, and that's quite obvious. But if they do, you want to be following the convention. If you're fixing a bug and you're working within a function and you can see a particular code style, then you want to be adhering to that. Because the next person after you who's reading that code, they want to be, you want to be allowing them to read it in a very smooth way, Okay, so where are we? Go to Meetups, learn the difference between, yeah, we've done that. Learn code styles, yeah, we've done that. Okay, number 14 then is to create a portfolio and start blogging. Okay, so this is super important. Even if you don't have anything to show, you still want to be creating, in my opinion, a portfolio and a blog. The portfolio could literally just be a landing page that just says what you do, okay, to begin with. It doesn't have to be crazy. You don't have to go into any kind of crazy details to the projects that you've worked on. In fact, in some cases, you have to sign NDAs that's, that state that you're not allowed to mention any of these things, right? So check that. This is me. This is the skills that I know, that kind of jazz. But have a blog attached to it, and when you're learning something new, write that down. And it's a weird one, because I can appreciate a lot of people will go, well, hang on a minute. People have already done this before. People before me have done this before. Why do I have any skin in the game here? Why should I write a blog for other people to read? I always take the impression that, or take the stance that you should be writing for yourself. Okay, so write for your past self. If your past self reads your blog, then you'll be teaching your past self how to do what you do at the moment. And believe you me, there'll be someone out there who will be looking at this, and you will be improving their day. Also, you're right in thinking that this has happened before. A lot of people have written the same thing, but perhaps you've done it from a very different perspective. Perhaps you've approached it differently. Maybe the outcome is the same. I'll give you an example. I was looking at a blog the other day, and it was to do with Kubernetes. I wanted to learn something about Kubernetes, and they were using a very different way of deployment. I think they were using Helm, and I wasn't. But I still wanted to learn the specific parts of what I wanted to learn. So I was reading a load of other stuff that they went through to get to the point in which I was at, and then I found the solution through their blog. So what I'm trying to say is that you can have the same problem as someone else, but attack it from a different angle, approach it from a different angle, I should say, and come out with a similar outcome. It's very, very useful. And also, when you start blogging a lot, you'll often find your own blog articles in search engines. Now, this I don't mean to blow my own trumpet here, but you forget a lot of stuff as a dev. There's a lot of stuff to remember, and there's a lot of stuff to forget. And there's a lot of stuff that perhaps I will forget, and then I'll Google, and I'll come back, and it'll come up with my blog, and it's the article that I created for that particular thing. So I use blogging like notes, basically my notes to myself. And if anybody has any use from that, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Okay, so create a portfolio and blog. And with your portfolio, as I said, when you start off, there isn't really much you can put on your portfolio apart from, who you are, what you've learned, what skills you've got, that kind of thing. As you start progressing, maybe you're doing some side projects, and we'll get onto that in a minute. You could start putting your side projects down in a portfolio if you would like. And I suppose it really depends on where you want to go in your career. Portfolio is very useful for when you want to be a freelancer. Not so much perhaps when you're in steady full-time employment, because your portfolio, when you're in a freelancer stroke contractor, that becomes your digital resume, shall I say. This is the stuff that you've worked on previously. These are the skills that I know, that kind of stuff. Whereas when you're a full-time dev, it's mostly your CV and the names of the companies you've worked for previously. Anywho, we'll get on to a lot of that stuff soon. Okay, so number 15 then is go full-time first before doing contracting and work for a well-known company. Okay, so I'm going to say contracting stroke freelance there. So, okay. So when you go full time, the major difference, there's many differences obviously, but one of the major differences between full time and freelance work is that when you're freelance, it's just you. When you're a full time dev, you're working with a team of developers. There's a structure, there is a hierarchy, there's a process. All of those things are all in play. When you're a freelancer, you're on your own. You have to come up with all of those things on your own. You become a businessman. You become an an engineer, a developer, a marketeer, an accountant, all sorts of things, all wearing all sorts of hats when you're a freelancer. And when you're first starting out as a junior dev, I highly recommend working full-time first, because you want to be, well, it sounds odd, but you almost want to be using those positions as a sort of a test the waters, trial and error kind of thing. You're going to be making a lot of mistakes when you're a junior dev. And when you're a junior dev, you want to be doing those mistakes in a safer environment than on your own. So as a junior dev, for instance, I've destroyed production, I've destroyed servers, I've destroyed all sorts of stuff. As a junior dev, I started learning Linux. As a junior dev, I ruined a lot of things. And I was able to do that in the safety of the team that I was in, right? When you're a freelancer, it's your responsibility. You've got to clean that mess up. I mean, it's your responsibility when you mess up in a full-time position, but you don't have the support around you. That's what I'm trying to say here. So see full-time positions as a support network, essentially. And you also get an understanding for how large teams work, which is great. Because another tip, I think it's somewhere down here, I'll pick it up in a minute. Another tip is to work on both large companies, large companies, and also small companies. You want to have that diverse sort of appreciation of how different it is when you have to go through all sorts of rigmarole in a large company, a large team, versus a small shoot from the hip, get it out the door as quick as we can, but done well team, a startup essentially. It's and then try and have some positions in between that, and do those full time as well, because you get a very, very interesting experience from each one of those. And every team I've worked on, big and small, is very different, very unique, and it's great. And certain things are done well, certain things aren't done not so well, and there's scope for improvement. It's great. But when you're on your own and you're a freelancer, that's it. You've got no support network. It's just you. So yeah, you might be coming to web development thinking that you can do all of this stuff as a freelancer, and you'll one day you'll have your own you'll have your own business and stuff. And yeah, please do have that aspiration. But when you're starting out, know that it's tough, and look at using full-time positions as your safety net, essentially, for learning and developing your own skills. And then when you get to a point where you feel more comfortable with your own abilities, then make the jump. Also, whilst you're in a full-time position, do side projects that amount to freelance. As well. That's how I did it. So I was a full-time dev and I had freelance work on the side. I didn't have enough freelance work on the side to be a full-time dev, a full-time freelancer, but I had that coming in and I was able to build up my reputation as it goes. Okay, so where are we now? We are at create a portfolio, done that. Okay. So number 16 is learn what technical debt is, learn how to identify it, and make proposals to remove it. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the messy code versus clean code stuff. So you want to be able to identify technical debt in the code base that you're working on, and you want to be making proposals on how to clean that up. This shows that you have you're willing and you're passionate for improving the code base going forward, not just for you, but for your other team members as well. Okay, so number 17 is to learn to communicate to non-engineers. Non-engineers. So I mentioned earlier about product owners and stuff. There are other people who are not... I haven't mentioned here, but other areas of different departments, different people that perhaps you'll be talking to on a daily basis. maybe even the client. Maybe you'll be talking to the end user, the client. So you want to learn how, and this is a skill that I'm still developing, and that is how you can talk about the technicalities of the thing that you do, but in a way that makes sense to someone who doesn't do it every day. So they have a level of appreciation of what you do, but you don't have to go. You don't have to go all out on it. You don't have to scare them off. But it's a way of explaining. Maybe if they don't understand something, it's a way of explaining it to them in a way that makes sense to them. That's the whole point here, is to talk about software in a way that makes sense to the end user or another party, another actor, to get your point across as a programmer, but in a way that makes sense to the end user, to them. Okay, so that was number 17. Number 18 then. Show loyalty when something goes down. It's time for you to step up and increase your reputation. So what I do, you probably noticed, what I do with these things, when I do these lists, is I just write a line for each one and then I talk around it. So show your loyalty when something goes down. So what I'm saying is when things break, when things go down, maybe it's not your fault, maybe it is. But it's kind of, you want to be jumping on that and, helping out where you can. Obviously, don't get in the way, but you want to be, if you're able to shed light on something, then you can do so. Often what happens when someone mentions that something's gone wrong, I would be in the background searching for various things. If I was to be brought into a meeting and it wasn't necessarily my work, however, I had access to the code base, and if someone asked a question and everyone was like, oh, I don't know, I would have a look in the code base and say, well, I haven't worked on this, but I can see X, Y, Z. Don't take this as gospel, but I can see this. And then, that shows that you are keen and willing and loyal. It also shows that you have a reputation for trying to achieve the common goal, which is great. But try and do it in a way that isn't getting in the way of the people who are actually trying to solve the problem, right? So offer your assistance, but don't ram it down people's throats. This is a really nice beer. It's going down very well. Okay, so we've done communicating to non-engineers. We've done show loyalty when something goes down. And also, when you leave, so this is when you're leaving for another career. So this is an awkward one because so I don't like leaving work. I don't like leaving a company in a bad state. I prefer to leave with the door wide open. So it's that saying of leave them wanting more, So I try not to leave a company as a contractor, I don't leave a company in a worse state than when I started. But if a project is overrunning and it's time for me to go, then if there was an opportunity to continue and it fit in my space, then I would consider continuing to see it through. And also, you want to be building bridges rather than removing bridges. So every team that I've worked with in the past many years, shall we say, I've enjoyed and I've appreciated, and I don't think that there's ever been a team in which I wouldn't work for again, just because I've built a rapport with people. And I think that's really important. As a contractor, I am perhaps seen more as a resource than an actual, a full-time employee who is, part of the furniture, shall we say. But at the same time, even though I am a resource, I want to show that I am loyal, keen and willing, and I do want to improve the company moving forward. And therefore, I don't really know what I'm trying to say here. Basically, don't leave leave your company in a mess. Don't leave with any hostility. You want to try and make as many friends as you can. You want to don't leave with any grudges. It's this is all about your reputation. As a contractor, I am my own brand. So and it's funny, the amount of contracts that I've had where I've worked with the same developers, even though we didn't know that they were working there. It would be like, oh, hey, haven't seen you in 3 months or 6 months. Which is nice because, you get to build up a rapport with the other developers, and maybe you've worked with a similar developer on another team. That, that's nice. So you don't want to be looking to pick fights. You want to be looking to, I see work as a social thing. We do a lot of work. The time that we work is huge. It's like 8 hours a day, right? So you want to be enjoying that work. You don't want to be you don't want to be pissing anyone off. You know what I mean? You want to have fun. You want to enjoy it. Okay. I don't really know where I was going with that. Okay, so don't leave it in a mess. Leave with the door open. Number 20 is you're never too old to learn. Okay, so you're never too old to learn. I think when people say, I'm too old to learn this or that, it's a bit worrying, because it's like there's so many things of web development that I just don't know, and I'm old. I'm 36, so there's a lot of stuff that haven't done. I'm now in the direction of going into my 40s, right? So and there's a lot of stuff. There's even a lot of stuff to do with CSS that I don't know. There's stuff that I don't know about in terms of just different operating systems. I'm now working on Windows, and I haven't worked on Windows for years, and I'm having to relearn Windows, the operating system, navigating around the crazy file structure and stuff. So you're never too old to learn, I don't think. Okay, number 21 is switching languages. As a junior dev, I think it's important that when you feel comfortable enough, and this is the thing, you need to know when you feel comfortable enough. But when you feel comfortable enough that you know a programming language, switch to something else. Learn something else. If you do JavaScript, switch to Python or PHP or something else. Ruby, Go. Because you get an idea for how that programming language works, and how the differences between your misconceptions, perhaps, of what programming languages are in a general sense. If you're a JavaScript dev and you go straight to something like Go or C, then you've got problems with, say, all sorts of different complexities, shall we say. So having that ability of learning multiple languages. So I know a fair amount of programming languages, and I find that when I learn another programming language, it gets easier because I'm able to bring the experience of the previous programming languages with me. And if you're very new to programming, there are various different concepts of programming that are very generic to every programming language. It's it's a transferable skill. Programming. Not all of it, obviously, and there are certain things that are specific to certain programming languages, of course. But if once you know an if statement, you can write an if statement all over the place, right? That's what I'm trying to say. Maybe the syntax different, but you know the logical flow. A function. Okay, so maybe a function is called something different in Python than it is in declared differently in Python than it is in PHP, or that it is in JavaScript, but you know what a function is, right? That kind of stuff. So you want to learn those concepts and learn them well. And then when you feel comfortable that you know a particular programming language, you want to switch it. You want to switch that programming language. And I would say switch that programming language more than switch the framework. Because I think you'll gain better knowledge from switching a programming language to changing to the next hotness of a framework. Okay. So number 22 is to listen to podcasts. So when you're watching tutorials and doing courses and stuff, you're very focused and dialed in on the thing that you do, the thing that you're learning. But with podcasts, you can put them in the background and you can passively learn and listen. And there are various podcasts that I listen to, and some of them talk about their day, as a programmer. Some of them talk about tech news, so that's the way I get my tech news. And some of them talk about the changes in the environment of web development and software. And so you get a finger on the pulse kind of approach, which is nice. And you can have it in the background running. And I find podcasts are a really great way to learn about software without looking at a screen. So podcasts are a great way to learn about software development without actually looking at a screen. That's the beauty of podcasts. Okay, so where are we now? We're on number 23, and that is to build a network. So when you're moving from company to company, you want to be building a network of people. As I mentioned, there are some contractors that I know, and we've worked together in various different projects. That is awesome. It's a mini network of people that I know. I know how they work. They know how I work. I know how to make them laugh. They know how to make me laugh. I also with the startups, that's a really good one to if you do a bit of startups, if you're working with startups, get to know the owners of those. They may have ideas and stuff that they want freelancers to do in the future. You want to, as I said, you want to be keeping those doors open. You don't want to be closing any doors, burning any bridges when you leave a company. Okay, so number 24 kind of fits into that. So work for a startup as well as a big company. So when you're a junior, you want to, I think I've already mentioned this, you want to learn the various the differences between large companies and small companies, how they work, how they operate, how they deploy, how they test, how they do things, how they have meetings. It's all very different. It's all very different. Also, number 25 is, in my opinion, now this is very opinionated, as a junior developer, don't do remote working first if you can help it. I know that remote working is a very sort of sought after thing, but in my experience, it's best to be around the developers who are better than you, who are more senior than you. I should say more senior than better. I think that's probably a better way of saying that. More senior than you, who've had more experience than you. It's weird. It's almost like you can absorb their knowledge easier when they are stood by you, right? Than being remote. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of negative things with being remote that if you don't identify as a junior developer, you can fall into these kind of traps. Like, for instance, if you're a remote dev, sometimes it's tempting to just go offline, or if you're stuck on a bug, it's tempting not to make that known. It's tempting just to be a bit of a hermit and work on your small little project. And by the end of the week, someone's going to be asking you, where it is. And if you say, it's you haven't done XYZ, then you get, if you haven't mentioned that in the days prior, it's very tempting to not say the things that are wrong. That's what I'm trying to say, and hide behind the screen. Whereas when you're in a team in a building, then it's easier to not hide. Because the thing is, these teams, these Zooms, these meetings, these online meetings, there is it's a weird culture. It's like you have to unmute yourself. That's weird, isn't it? You don't go to a meeting with a mask. I mean, you do now because of COVID, of course. But do you know what I mean? You don't go into a meeting and you don't just put your hand up and say, "Can I speak?" But you do when you're on a Zoom. So yeah, odd. Okay, so number 26. This is the last one then. Number 26 is learn how to debug, get the logs, and become a detective. So a lot of the things that we do, we have to do in a very sort of detective kind of way. We have to root through all the code. We have to go through all the history. We have to speak to all sorts of people about the decisions that were made. We have to understand the end user's requirements. We have to learn, all sorts about the background of the project. And we also need to know where to look when things go wrong, right? So you need to know where the log files are. You need to know how things are being monitored and set up. Those things are very, 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 very important to know. And they will help you improve as a developer. So that's 26. And now I've probably mentioned a lot more as we've gone through, but and I can think of a couple already, but I'll need to formulate those. So I might do another list like this in the future. If you can think of any ones that I haven't mentioned, if you think there's some that I should talk about in the future, or if you just, things that I've forgotten perhaps, then do let me know. Put them down in the comment section below. I would really appreciate that. Let's continue the discussion. It's not a one-sided thing. So this is a podcast. This will be going out next Friday on the podcast players. So if you listen to Spotify or iTunes or anything like that, you can search for How to Code Well, the podcast. Tomorrow is going to be last week's episode, which is 106. And that's all about PHP roadmap. I've created a PHP roadmap for PHP developers to learn various PHP concepts and things. And that will be out tomorrow at 7 a.m. British summertime, as it always is on a Friday. So I do these live streams sort of a week in advance. That kind of that's what I do. So anyway, thank you ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everyone, and have a fantastic week. And if I don't speak to you beforehand on Twitter or on Discord, then I hope to see you on Sunday on Twitch at 14:30 British summertime. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.